The afternoon sky was a low, endless stretch of gray, heavy with rain, and the kind of wind that howls through fence posts, like it's searching for something lost. The prairie had taken on a somber hue, muted and lonely, as if the land itself were holding its breath. The storm had been raging since dawn, hammering roofs, bending the wheat stalks, and turning every dirt road into a slick path of red clay and muck. Inside a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of town, Clara McAllister sat by the window, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, watching the rain carve streaks down the glass. The sound of the storm had always comforted her in a strange way. It reminded her that the world was still moving, still alive, even when she felt stuck in time. Her husband had been gone for nearly 6 years, taken by the war first and then by the fire that burned down their home by the river. After that, she'd moved to this old farmhouse her cousin had left behind, living quietly with her few cows, a small garden, and memories that refused to fade. She spent her days in a rhythm that made loneliness tolerable. Mornings began with milking Daisy, the old brown cow that was her closest thing to company. She'd hum soft songs from her childhood while the milk filled the tin pail, the rhythmic patter steady and sure. Then she'd set about baking bread or sewing, her hands busy though her mind drifted. Sometimes she'd catch herself speaking aloud, asking questions to no one, as if her husband might still answer from across the room. That day, the storm had cut her off from the world entirely. No travelers passed, no wagons creaked down the muddy road. She sat by the stove, reading by the dim light, when she heard it. A knock. Sharp and urgent. The kind of knock that wasn't casual or polite, but desperate. Clara froze. Out here, strangers rarely came unannounced, and certainly not in this weather. She stood slowly, her heart ticking faster, and reached for the iron poker by the stove before moving toward the door. When she opened it, the cold wind rushed in, bringing the smell of rain and wet earth. Standing there was a man, drenched from head to toe. His coat was heavy with mud, his hat sagged from the weight of the rain, and in his arms he held a small bundle, wrapped in an old blanket, trembling faintly. "Ma'am," the man said, voice rough and uneven. I'm sorry to trouble you. I heard there was a woman out here with cows. My boy, he hasn't had milk in 2 days. I didn't know where else to go." The word struck her like a blow to the chest. She looked down at the bundle in his arms, a tiny face, pale and hungry, eyes barely open. The child made a weak, gasping sound that wasn't quite a cry, more like a plea. Clara stepped aside without thinking. "Come in," she said. "Quickly now. You'll both freeze out there." The man hesitated as though afraid he was bringing more trouble than he intended, but when the baby whimpered again, he stepped inside. Mud and rainwater dripped onto the wooden floor as he crossed the threshold. Clara shut the door behind him, barring the wind. She took the baby gently from his arms, her hands moving with a care that surprised her. It had been years since she'd held something so small, so fragile. She could feel the tiny heartbeat fluttering against her palm. "Sit down by the fire," she said. "You're soaked through." He nodded and sank into the wooden chair near the stove, shivering as the warmth began to reach him. His hat was still on his head, and Clara could see his hands trembling, not just from the cold but from something deeper, worry, fear, or exhaustion. She poured some milk from the morning's milking into a small pot and warmed it on the stove. The smell of it filled the room, comforting and familiar. She found one of the old bottles she'd used years ago, washed it, and filled it with the warm milk. Then she sat beside the man and offered the bottle to the child, who began to drink greedily, the faint sound of swallowing filling the space. The man leaned forward, eyes locked on his child, relief etched into every line of his face. "God bless you, ma'am," he murmured, his voice low. "I didn't think he'd make it through the night." Clara smiled faintly. "He's stronger than he looks." "What's his name?" "Eli," the man said softly. "Named after his grandfather." She nodded, looking down at the baby. "Eli," she repeated. "That's a fine name." "He's a beautiful boy," the man smiled weakly. "He's all I've got left." Clara glanced at him then, studying his face for the first time. He was probably in his early 30s, though the years had carved him harder than that. A scar ran along his temple, disappearing into his short, rain-darkened hair. His eyes were gray, like the storm outside. But behind them was a softness that didn't belong to a stranger hardened by life. "What's your name?" she asked. "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Rourke. I've been working over at the Holloway Ranch, but they let most of us go last week. Couldn't feed all the hands through the storm season. You've been traveling with the boy since then?" He nodded. "Been sleeping in the barn at Miller's Crossing when they'd let me. But Eli took sick. He needs milk, not water and bread. Someone said you keep cows, so I came." Clara looked toward the window, the rain still lashing the glass. "In weather like this, that's near impossible. You could have drowned on those roads." Daniel gave a small, rueful smile. "Would have tried anyway. Can't lose him too." There was a silence between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Clara listened to the wind and the baby's soft breathing. Something in Daniel's voice had stirred an ache deep inside her chest, a reminder of all she'd once fought to protect and all she'd lost. She rose quietly, fetched a towel, and handed it to him. "Dry yourself off. I'll fix something warm to eat." He began to protest, but she silenced him with a look. "You've got a child to care for. Let me do what I can." He nodded, wordless, and began drying his hair. Clara turned back to the stove, ladling out the stew she'd made earlier. A simple mix of potatoes, onions, and carrots, but hearty enough to fill an empty stomach. As the smell filled the room, Daniel's shoulders seemed to relax. After they ate, Daniel leaned back, his eyes closing for a moment. Clara could see the exhaustion written all over him, the weight of miles and worry dragging him down. Eli had fallen asleep in her arms, tiny fingers curled around her thumb. The warmth of his little body seeped into her, soothing something she hadn't realized was still raw. Then Daniel spoke again, softly. "You used to live down by the river, didn't you? McAllister Place." Clara froze. Her heart gave a sharp, painful twist. "Yes," she said after a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "Before the fire." Daniel opened his eyes, and the expression there made her breath hitch. Recognition, guilt, sadness. "I was there that night," he said quietly. "The soldiers were trying to get folks out when the barn caught. I remember you. Your husband was shouting for you. He told me to get you through the smoke." Her mind reeled back through the years, flashes of heat, the roar of fire, the weight of smoke choking the air. She remembered strong arms lifting her, carrying her through darkness, the world spinning before she fainted. When she woke, everything was gone. "You," she murmured, eyes wide. "You were the one. I never even saw your face." He nodded slowly, his gaze lowering. "I thought you'd died. When they pulled your husband's body out, I figured he'd gone back for you. I carried that guilt a long time." Clara's throat tightened. She looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms, tears blurring her vision. "All this time," she whispered, "you saved me, and I didn't even know your name." He rubbed the back of his neck, his voice rough. "Didn't feel like saving. I couldn't save everyone. I left behind things I'll never forgive myself for." The words hung heavy between them. Clara wanted to reach out, to tell him that guilt was a burden that never really lifted, that she knew the shape of it all too well. But she said nothing. She just held the baby closer, the small heartbeat steady and alive against her chest. The fire crackled softly, painting their faces in shades of gold and amber. Daniel watched her for a long while before speaking again. "You lost someone too, didn't you?" She nodded slowly. "My husband, James. He was brave, foolishly so. Tried to save the horses. The roof fell before he made it back." Daniel closed his eyes. "He was the one who told me to take you first. Said you mattered more. He said, 'Get her out, soldier. I can handle myself.'" The memory broke something inside her. She had imagined James's final moments 1,000 times, always wondering what his last words had been. To hear them now, from the man who had carried her out of that inferno, felt like the closing of a circle she hadn't known was still open. She blinked away tears. "You've carried that night with you all this time," she said softly. He nodded. "Couldn't forget it. Every time I see smoke, I remember." She looked at him, really looked at him. The rough hands, the weary eyes, the scar. A man carved by hardship and loss, yet still gentle enough to come begging for milk for his son. And in that moment, something shifted. The years of silence that had settled over her heart began to crack, just a little. She smiled faintly. Seems fate wanted us to meet again. Only this time, you're the one asking for help. Daniel let out a quiet laugh, one that carried more pain than joy. Guess it did. Didn't mean to drag my past back to your door.